This video is on sampling techniques, helping you identify participants for your research study. One of the most important things to remember is that selecting research participants, helping you identify who is going to be involved with your study, is probably the most important aspect of the whole study. One thing to remember is to differentiate between selection and assignment. Selection means identifying those individuals who are going to be able to participate in your study. With this selection process, we're going to focus on two things. Number one, inclusion criteria. What are those characteristics that the individuals must have to enable them to participate in your study? Number two is exclusion criteria, and those are the characteristics or traits that an individual must not possess to be included, and if they do possess it, that will exclude them from your study. The second is assignment, and this is how you're going to determine what the nature of their participation is. Are they going to be in the control group, serving as the baseline, or then one of your experimental groups to determine if your manipulation of the variables is worthwhile or not. Couple key definitions to remember as we're going through this. A population is the entire group of individuals or objects or participants that you're going to study. So an example is if you're looking at collegiate athletes, your entire population would likely be all collegiate athletes in the United States. If you want to look at collegiate athletes in the state of Georgia, then it's going to be all collegiate athletes at one of the institutions in the state of Georgia. The sample then is a group of individuals that is taken from the entire population. And one thing that we need to be cognizant of is that that sample or that subset is representative of the population. And to be representative, it means that we are making sure that all the important characteristics of that sample are identical or proportional to that of the population. An example of this representativeness may include things like gender or race or any certain trait that you want. We've got to make sure that your sample is proportional to the entire population. Another important definition, remember, is the sampling frame. Unfortunately, not every person from the population is going to be accessible to you. There are some individuals, whether they're children or prisoners or elderly or pregnant individuals, that are just not going to be accessible to you in terms of who you can use as a research participant. And that population that is accessible to you and that you can obtain is what we call our sampling frame. So let's look at an example. We have 40 individuals here in our entire population. This may be the makeup of a class. We've got 20 men and 20 women. If we were going to break them up into two groups, we wanted 12 members in each group. A non-representative way would be to just pick 12 individuals. In this instance, we got 2 women and 10 men. We can see that based on gender, this is not proportional or not representative to the entire population. A more representative way of getting those 12 people would be to look at 6 women and 6 men, because that means that, like the population, our sample has equal number of men and women. And as we are starting to look at, as we're going through and starting to identify who we want to use as our participants, we need to try to emphasize these randomized techniques. These are the best techniques at getting participants, and these are the ones that are most highly desirable. Number one is a simple random sample. This just means that you're going to get the entire population, and at random you're going to identify individuals who are going to participate in your study. You can do this through a variety of different methods. Random numbers, you can just put all their names in a hat or a fishbowl and draw them out. At any stake, it's just a very simple random drawing of all potential participants until you get enough to be in your sample. A more difficult way is what we call a stratified method. This is where you're going to take that entire population, break them up into subgroups. That could be based on gender, on age groups, on race, on regions of the country, and then from each group that you break the population into, you're going to get a random number of individuals from that group. Another way is a systematic sampling. This is where you're going to choose every nth person from a randomized list, and this is a number that you're going to predetermine. So you could have your entire list alphabetically, and you're going to choose the 10th person, the 17th person, the 20th person, and you're going to just go down your list, and every 17th person, you're going to include them in your sample. Another method is what we call a cluster sampling, and this is where you're going to put them into groups, just like we did with stratified sampling, but then out of that, we are going to pick specific individuals. When we look at non-randomized techniques, these are techniques that we do not randomize, so that these are the ones that the participants don't have an equal chance. And with non-randomized techniques, we're usually picking people based on a specific characteristic that they do or do not possess. The first one is a systematic sampling. This again is just like the randomized, where you're obtaining every nth person in a population. But in a non-randomized sampling, you're going to go to the Wellness Depot, you're going to go to Kroger, you're going to go to Walmart, and you're going to say that every fifth person that walks out that door, you're going to ask them to participate. Is it randomized? No, not necessarily, because not every person in the population goes to Kroger. Not every person in the population goes to the Wellness Depot. So only those individuals that go to those locations have a chance. So therefore, it is not randomized. The second is a convenience sample, and that's just any individual or group that's conveniently able to be studied. This is most commonly a single class or a course section. If we were to do a study of classes, it would be very easy to identify an entire class, go talk to that class because they're an intact group that already exists that would be easy for you to get access to. This is probably one of the least desirable ones, because to make up a class or to make up most of these groups, it's not randomly assigned, and so we have groups that are already intact based on some characteristic that they already possess. A third type is a purposive sample, and this is where you're picking people based on a specific characteristic that they have or do not have. This is, again, not highly desirable, but there are certain investigations that you may have that you have to have a purposive sampling. So once you have your individuals, the question becomes, how large of a group is enough? And to determine that, in all actuality, the big thing we have to look for is statistical power. If you run a test, can you find that there is a significant difference? And if we have large enough groups, you will be able to find that there is or is not a difference based on that number of individuals. But sometimes we have to remember that size doesn't necessarily matter, because take the Literary Digest poll an example. They had called thousands of individuals and had predicted that Franklin Delano Roosevelt would be defeated in the 1936 presidential election. Unfortunately, FDR was not defeated. So when the Literary Digest poll had actually published the results, they were looking like fools, because they had said that FDR was going to lose by a landslide in this, when actually he won by a landslide. What was their problem? Representativeness was not taken into account. They only pulled a certain group of individuals, and unfortunately that group of individuals that they pulled was not representative of the entire population. If your sample is not representative of the population, then we have no means of knowing whether your treatment was truly effective or not. Another thing that we have to remember is that non-respondents are going to happen, and participants may choose to drop out or die out throughout your study. So it's always best to have a few more than what you think are needed, rather than having a few less. So what constitutes a good sample size? For most studies, a good rule of thumb is that about 15 people per group is what is easily replicated. So that means if you have a study that has 3 different groups, you should plan on at least 45 individuals. So trying to get about 20 people per group would be ideal. When it comes to sample size, what are some good rules of thumb? You shouldn't have to identify more than 50% in a population. If your entire population is only 100 individuals, it's very feasible to actually go out and survey or test all 100 people. If your entire population is 30,000, then no, it's not feasible or practical to actually test all 30,000 people. But again, we need to make sure that our sample size is large enough so that we have anywhere from 15 to 30 per group. So from here, your task is to develop a concept map of the sampling techniques, both the randomized and non-randomized. In your small groups, compare and contrast the randomized and non-randomized techniques. Through this, you should highlight the strengths of each technique, but also then identify the pitfalls of each technique. And you're going to see as you begin this process that some of the strengths of each technique are very similar, and some of the pitfalls of the different techniques are also similar, so you should use that in your concept map.